August 23, 1514. The plain of Chaldiran, eastern Anatolia. Shah Ismail I of Persia is running, not retreating, not conducting a tactical withdrawal, running. His personal bodyguard, the red-capped Qizilbash cavalry who had never broken in 15 years of warfare, are dead or scattered across a field that hours ago they had every reason to believe was theirs. His senior commanders are dead. His wife has been captured. His horse has been wounded under him. He is the Shah of Persia. He is considered by his followers to be a living saint, a divine figure, a man whose presence on the battlefield is itself a guarantee of victory. His soldiers have ridden into combat without armor because they believe his holiness makes them invulnerable to weapons. He is bleeding. He is alone. He is fleeing the field of Chaldiran as fast as a wounded horse can carry him. Behind him, the Ottoman army is not even pursuing hard. It does not need to. The battle is already over. It was over in a morning. This is the story of how Sultan Selim I brought a force of 1,500 Janissaries and a line of field artillery to the plain of Chaldiran and destroyed the most confident army in the Islamic world before midday. And it begins not with soldiers or cannons or cavalry, but with a letter. In 1513, Selim I, known to history as Selim the Grim, wrote a letter to Shah Ismail of Persia. The letter was not a diplomatic communication. It was not an offer of negotiation. It was an extended, methodically argued theological insult, accusing Ismail and his Safavid followers of heresy, apostasy, and the corruption of true Islam, and informing the Shah in precise and deliberate language that Selim intended to correct the situation personally. He sent the same letter 3 times to make sure it arrived. To understand why 2 of the most powerful rulers in the Islamic world had descended to exchanging theological death threats, you have to go back to the beginning of both men. Shah Ismail I came to power in 1501 at the age of 14. He took Tabriz, declared himself Shah of Persia, and announced that the 12 Shia branch of Islam was now the state religion of his empire. This was not a minor administrative decision. It was a declaration of religious identity that drew a line through the entire Islamic world and dared every Sunni power to respond. Ismail was not merely a political ruler. He was the head of the Safaviya Sufi order, and his followers believed he was descended from the Imam Ali himself. They called him the Shadow of God. His Qizilbash warriors went into battle wearing distinctive red 12-pointed caps, symbolizing their devotion to the 12 Imams. Many of them genuinely believed that their spiritual connection to Ismail made them physically impossible to kill. In 15 years of warfare, Ismail had conquered Persia, taken Iraq, pushed into Anatolia, and not lost a single battle. Not one. His confidence was not arrogance. It was a track record. Selim I was a different kind of man entirely. He came to the Ottoman throne in 1512 by removing his father Bayezid II and having his brothers strangled. Standard Ottoman succession procedure, brutal but efficient. He was not a man given to sentiment or patience. He was focused, ruthless, and possessed of a strategic clarity that cut through complexity the way a blade cuts through cloth. He looked east and saw 2 threats, the Safavids in Persia and the Mamluks in Egypt. He decided to deal with them in order. Persia first. But there was a problem inside his own empire before he could deal with Persia at all. The Qizilbash movement had followers throughout Anatolia. Ismail's religious appeal crossed borders. Selim's intelligence networks told him there were Qizilbash sympathizers, potentially tens of thousands of them, living inside Ottoman territory. Selim's solution was characteristically direct. Before he marched a single soldier toward Persia, he identified every Qizilbash sympathizer his administrators could locate inside Anatolia. The estimates ranged from 40,000 to 70,000 people. He had them executed. It took months. When it was done, he turned east. The march to Chaldiran is one of the most grueling military movements in Ottoman history. Selim left Aden in spring 1514 and pushed his army across Anatolia at a pace that broke men and horses in roughly equal measure. Supply lines stretched to their absolute limit. The march broke men and horses in roughly equal measure. His Janissaries mutinied twice during the march, not out of cowardice, out of physical exhaustion, and the rational observation that they were being driven into a campaign that logistics could not support. Selim's response to the first mutiny was to execute the ringleaders. His response to the second was to appear personally in front of the Janissary formation, draw his sword, and invite anyone who wished to turn back to step forward. Nobody stepped forward. They kept marching. Shah Ismail watched the Ottoman army coming and chose his ground carefully. The plain of Chaldiran, in what is now northwestern Iran, was open terrain, flat enough for cavalry to operate at full speed, wide enough to accommodate the kind of sweeping flanking maneuvers that Qizilbash horsemen had used to win every battle of the past 15 years. It was ground that suited Ismail's army perfectly. It was also ground that suited Selim's artillery perfectly. But Ismail did not know that yet, because nobody had ever brought field artillery to bear against him before. This is the gap at the center of everything that happened on August 23, 1514. Ismail's army was built around cavalry. Fast, ferocious, deeply motivated cavalry that believed its own invulnerability and had 15 years of battlefield results to support that belief. It had beaten armies through speed, through flanking, through the sheer psychological shock of the Qizilbash charge. It had never faced a prepared defensive line anchored by field guns. Selim had spent years building exactly that. The Janissaries were not ordinary soldiers. They were the product of the Devshirme system, Christian boys taken from their families, converted to Islam, and raised from childhood in a military institution that trained them for nothing else. They had no families to distract them, no land to return to, no identity outside the corps. They were, by design, the most professional soldiers in the known world, and by 1514 they were equipped with matchlock firearms and supported by an artillery train that Selim had been expanding and improving for years. He had watched what gunpowder weapons had done at Panipat. He had watched what artillery had done to fortifications across the Balkans. He understood, with the clarity that made him one of history's great military minds, that the age of cavalry supremacy was ending and the age of firepower was beginning. Shah Ismail understood no such thing. On the morning of August the 23rd, you are standing in the Janissary line. You have been marching for months. Your feet remember every stone between Edirne and this plain. The man beside you has not had a full night's sleep in 3 weeks. Across the field, the Safavid army fills the horizon. Qizilbash cavalry in their red caps, thousands of them. Then the order comes, not to advance, to hold. And you understand what Selim is doing. He is waiting for them to come to him. Selim's defensive line, chained wagons creating the barrier, artillery positioned behind, Janissaries in formation with matchlocks. The Safavid commanders looked at the Ottoman line and saw what they expected to see: an exhausted army, a defensive formation, men who had marched too far and were holding a position because they could not attack. The open ground in front of them was perfect for the charge that had broken every enemy they had ever faced. They came forward. The Qizilbash cavalry advanced at full speed across the plain of Chaldiran in the way they had advanced across every other plain for 15 years. Thousands of horsemen, disciplined and ferocious, and absolutely certain of what was about to happen. The thunder of that charge is something no account of the battle fails to mention. It shook the ground. It raised dust that could be seen for miles. The Ottoman artillery fired. The first volley hit the Safavid formation at a range the Qizilbash commanders had not accounted for because they had never seen artillery used in the field this way before. The charge did not stop. Cavalry charges almost never stopped from a first volley, but the formation buckled. Gaps appeared. Horses went down. The artillery reloaded and fired again, and again. Each volley hit a formation that was moving faster now, compressing forward because the riders behind could not see what was happening ahead and were still accelerating into the charge. The tight mass of cavalry that made the Qizilbash so terrifying in close combat made them catastrophically vulnerable to artillery fire. Every ball that landed in that compressed formation did not kill one man. It killed a column. The charge reached the Ottoman line. When the Qizilbash cavalry hit the Ottoman line, it did not shatter. It did not bend. The Janissaries, positioned behind a barrier of chained wagons, fired their matchlocks at a range measured in feet and held their ground with a discipline that the Safavid commanders had not believed possible. On the Ottoman left flank, the Safavid cavalry broke through briefly. For a period of perhaps 30 minutes, the outcome was genuinely uncertain. The Grand Vizier Ali Pasha was killed in the fighting on that flank. The pressure was real, And the casualties were real, and anyone standing in that section of the line would have been certain the battle was lost. Selim did not move from his position. He waited for the artillery to do what artillery does to a cavalry force that has nowhere to retreat. The Safavid left flank broke first, then the right, then the center, where Shah Ismail himself was fighting, collapsed under a combined pressure of artillery fire, Janissary volleys, and an Ottoman cavalry countercharge. Ismail fought personally. This is confirmed by multiple sources. He was not a man who directed from the rear. He took wounds. He lost his horse. His personal bodyguard died around him in a final stand that was brave and futile in equal measure. By midday it was over. The Battle of Chaldiran lasted approximately 3 hours. The army that had been undefeated for 15 years, the army whose soldiers had ridden into combat without armor, had been broken by a line of chained wagons, a battery of field guns, and 1,500 Janissaries who had not taken a single backward step. Selim moved immediately. He did not pause at Chaldiran to consolidate or rest. He pushed the Ottoman army east and took Tabriz, the Safavid capital, within days. His army marched through the city that had been the jewel of Ismail's empire, and Selim walked through the palaces that Ismail had built. He did not stay long. His supply lines were at their absolute limit. Winter was coming. His Janissaries were in no mood to winter in Persia. He pulled back to Anatolia before the snows came. He had not destroyed the Safavid Empire. He had not killed Shah Ismail. He had not permanently occupied Tabriz. But he had done something more durable than any of those things. He had broken the myth. Shah Ismail never fought another battle after Chaldiran. He retreated into his court, reportedly turning to alcohol in the years that followed. The man who had believed himself divinely protected, now unable to reconcile his theology with the evidence of that august morning. He died in 1524, 10 years after Chaldiran, the empire intact, but the fire gone. The battle reoriented the entire political geography of the Middle East. The Ottoman Safavid border, established in the aftermath of Chaldiran, held, through constant warfare and periodic renegotiation, for centuries. The Sunni-Shia division it hardened into territorial reality still shapes the region today. The line Selim drew with artillery and Janissary rifles on a plain in eastern Anatolia is still visible, in different forms, on a modern map. Selim himself went on to Egypt 2 years later, destroyed the Mamluk Sultanate at the Battle of Radaniya in 1517, and absorbed the Hejaz, and with it the custody of Mecca and Medina, into the Ottoman Empire. He died in 1520, having tripled the size of the empire in 8 years. His son was Suleiman, the one history calls the Magnificent. None of it happens without Chaldiran. Here is the question the story leaves you with. Shah Ismail rode onto the plain of Chaldiran with an army that had never lost. His soldiers believed they could not be killed. He believed God was with him. By every conventional measure of military power in his world, he had every reason to be confident. Selim rode onto the same plain, having spent years building a specific answer to a specific kind of opponent. He had studied what cavalry armies did, and he had built the thing that unmakes them. He had marched further than his men thought possible, suppressed 2 mutinies, and arrived at Chaldiran exhausted and ready. The difference between those 2 men is not courage. Both of them were brave. It is not numbers. Ismail had the numbers. The difference is that Selim had asked a question Ismail had stopped asking. Ismail had not asked that question in 15 years because 15 years of winning had made it feel unnecessary. He arrived at Chaldiran with the same army, the same tactics, and the same confidence that had worked every time before. He had not considered that the world had changed, that somewhere across the border, a man had been watching him win and building the specific instrument of his defeat. Confidence built on a record is not the same as readiness built on study. Ismail had a record. Selim had done the work. The plain of Chaldiran is what happens when those 2 things meet. Next time, he was handed a dying empire and a treasury that was nearly empty. His own ministers expected him to last 2 years. His enemies were already dividing his territory on paper before he had finished his coronation. He ruled for 46 years. He rebuilt the navy from nothing, rewrote the legal code of an entire civilization, and expanded the empire further than anyone since Mehmed the Conqueror. His name was Suleiman, the one history calls the Magnificent. Coming next, the air above Chaldiran still carries the smell of black powder and blood. The ravens have not yet come down. They are waiting, watching from the heights. Somewhere to the east, a wounded horse is standing alone in the middle of the plain. It does not understand what just happened. Neither, in some ways, does the world it now inhabits. The letter Selim sent was not written in haste. Every line was constructed to provoke, to humiliate, to force a response. The Ottoman court understood the theological argument perfectly. Selim was not just insulting Ismail. He was declaring the Safavid claim to religious legitimacy null and void, and therefore declaring the Safavid state itself an abomination. In Ismail's court, the letter was read aloud 3 times. The third time, a Safavid commander reportedly said, "This is not a letter. It is a declaration of war." The Safaviya Sufi order had existed for 2 centuries before Ismail. His ancestors had built the spiritual foundation. He weaponized it. The Qizilbash were not just soldiers. They were a religious militia. Their loyalty was not to a king. It was to a living imam, a divine intermediary, a man they would follow into artillery fire without armor because they genuinely did not believe they could die. The tribes that made up the Qizilbash Confederation, the Ramlu, the Shamlu, the Ustajlu, the Qajar, had each surrendered their tribal identity to this collective devotion. Selim had studied the Qizilbash in detail. He had read every account of their battles he could obtain. He understood their strength, and he understood their weakness. The weakness was not the warriors. The weakness was the belief. An army that fights without armor because it believes it cannot die has already made a catastrophic tactical assumption. A man on horseback who believes he cannot die will charge directly into artillery fire. He will not seek cover. He will not adjust formation. He will not retreat when the first volley lands. The wagon fort, the Taburchengi, was not Selim's invention. The Hussites had used it in Bohemia a century earlier. The Muscovites used it on the steppe. Selim adapted it for this specific opponent. The wagons were chained together in a continuous line, creating a barrier that cavalry could not simply gallop through. The gaps between wagons were precisely sized, wide enough for Janissary muskets, too narrow for a horse at speed. Behind the wagons, the Janissaries in 3 ranks. Front rank fires, second rank reloads, third rank primes. A continuous rolling volley that never stops. Behind the Janissaries, the artillery, arranged not in a single line, but in a calculated arc, maximizing the overlapping fields of fire across the plain. In the hours before dawn on August 23rd, both armies performed their preparations. The Ottoman artillery crews checked their powder charges for the last time. In the Safavid camp, the Qizilbash performed their devotional prayers. Some of them removed their armor. They would not need it today. Shah Ismail rode along his cavalry line as the sun rose. His soldiers reached out to touch his stirrup as he passed. To touch him was to receive blessing. Sultan Selim rode his line too. His soldiers did not reach for his stirrup. They stood at attention. That was all he required. The Safavid right wing moved first, led by Muhammad Khan Ustajlu, the most senior Qizilbash commander on the field. The left wing followed, then the center, with Ismail himself in the formation. From the Ottoman line, the advancing Safavid cavalry filled the entire field of vision. At 1,000 meters, a dark rippling mass on the horizon. At 500, individual faces, individual red caps. At 300 meters, the Ottoman artillery commander gave the order. The Ottoman right flank held firm throughout the central battle. Rumelian cavalry under Selim's personal command did not break and did not move for the first 90 minutes. This was the critical discipline. The flanking cavalry existed not to charge, but to be the anvil against which the Safavid remnants would be destroyed once the artillery had done its work. Ali Pasha, Grand Vizier, the second most powerful man in the Ottoman Empire, had been given command of the left flank precisely because it was the most dangerous position. When the Safavid cavalry broke through on the left, Ali Pasha did not retreat. He turned toward the breakthrough and fought to contain it. He was killed in the press. His standard fell. For perhaps 20 minutes, the men on that flank did not know if the entire battle had just been lost. A runner came to Selim with news of Ali Pasha's death. Selim received it without expression. He asked 2 questions. Is the artillery still firing? Are the Janissaries holding the line? The runner said yes to both. Selim turned back to watch the field. He did not give the countercharge order yet. The artillery had more work to do. When Ismail's horse was struck, he did not call for a replacement mount. He fought on foot. His personal bodyguard, the Kerchis, formed a ring around him. The Kerchis died one by one. Some were shot by Janissary muskets. Some died under Ottoman cavalry blades. Each one that fell was a layer of the myth stripped away. At some point, no source agrees on exactly when, Ismail accepted that he had to leave the field or die on it. He chose to leave. Tabriz fell without a siege. There was no garrison left to defend it. The court had fled east ahead of the Ottoman advance. Selim spent 8 days in Tabriz. He methodically catalogued the palace treasures and removed the most skilled artisans to Constantinople. He left Tabriz before the first snows, not because he was afraid, because he had done what he came to do. The Ottoman Safavid wars would continue for the next century and a half. The border shifted back and forth, but it never moved far. Chaldiran established the approximate limits of both empires, and those limits held. The Peace of Zuhab in 1639, 125 years after Chaldiran, established a formal boundary that followed almost exactly the line that Selim's victory had implied. That 1639 border is, in modified form, the basis for the modern Iraq-Iran border. The artillery of Chaldiran drew a line that a satellite map can still see today. Before Chaldiran, the Sunni-Shia division was a theological dispute. After Chaldiran, it was also a geopolitical one. The division had a border now. Empires that share a border must define themselves against each other. The Ottoman Safavid border made Sunni and Shia identity not just religious choices, but national ones. 2 years after Chaldiran, Selim turned south. The Mamluks of Egypt controlled the Hejaz, the holy cities. Selim wanted the caliphate. The Mamluk Sultanate fell at Redania in January 1517. The same formula: Janissaries, artillery, the wagon fort. What had worked at Chaldiran worked again in Egypt. Selim I died on September 22, 1520. He was 50 years old. He had been sultan for 8 years. In those 8 years, he had tripled the territory of an already vast empire. He was not mourned with the elaborate public grief that accompanied the deaths of gentler sultans. He was respected. There is a difference.